August 1991. I was probably about just shy of my 5th birthday. And I clearly remember this moment when pandemonium had struck in our apartment building in Dubai. And I remember everybody frantically tuning in to the only TV station that we had, Channel 33, for those of you who are familiar with Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. We were all watching terrified as the Iraqi army had invaded Kuwait. And terror gripped our apartment building because not only were threats issued against Israel, threats were now issued against Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates shared a border with Saudi Arabia. I clearly remember people frantically running out, going to get groceries, filling up on gas, and watching in horror as members of the diaspora, especially from the subcontinent, were running for their lives in Kuwait and fleeing the Iraqi army as they established the Republic of Kuwait. At that moment, I clearly remember my father and my mother not doing anything at all. 15 years later, I would talk to my father and ask him, "Dad, not only did you survive multiple uprootions from an immigration standpoint, you also survived the situation between Tanzania and Uganda. Why wouldn't you move? Why wouldn't you act on this?" To which he said, "Son, when you reach the end of your understanding, or rather when you reach the end of what you know, you've come to the start of what you can sense." My guest today is someone who had to embrace the unknowns. And on many occasions while engaging in his cybersecurity practice, really had to go with what he could sense. My name is Ali Hirji, coming to you live from Oshawa. All of you know me as the lead for the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity at Durham College. And my guest today is someone who's going to help you understand how to think about the evolving nature of cybersecurity and those unknowns. Nelson Mandela once said, "We should constantly revisit spaces that remain unchanged so that we can measure it against how much we've evolved and how much we've changed." The story or the script around capturing Richard Hansen, around capturing a very dangerous cyber spy may still stay the same, but the learning and the experiences constantly change and evolve. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. Keeping in true with the spirit of VMware Carbon Black, today's session is going to focus on the good, the bad, and the gray of cybersecurity with a gentleman who is in no need of an introduction to the cybersecurity community. In fact, a gentleman who has introduced us to cybersecurity himself. Please join me in welcoming Eric O'Neill. Eric, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be here on the Power Hour, and I'm excited about talking about some of those hidden aspects, the gray aspects of cybersecurity and cyber spying.
Thank you so much, Eric. Eric, strategy. It's the art of knowing what not to do. You're innocent. Everyone knows your story, and we've been advertising the book and the movies, so on and so forth, and getting people immersed in the narrative. At the time, you were dealing with one particular device that you really needed to get your hands on. But today, devices, especially within enterprise or accessing our enterprise, are infinite. What has changed in your understanding of endpoint security from then to now? Eric?
That is a great place to start because endpoint security for a long time has been the holy grail of security. The idea that we can secure a device, we can prevent a breach or an attack or malware from using a device in a person's hand as the point of access to that data that we're trying to protect. And what I like to say is data is the currency of our lives. But we've had to change. And in security, we always are changing. We're always evolving. We're always trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. Here's the problem with endpoint security. It works when the person uses that device. And it's a brilliant strategy for security because you want to move security as close to the person who will make the mistake as possible. Because it's the person who is being attacked by the attackers now, not that device. So as we rethink endpoint security, particularly today, when the pandemic has created a necessary distributed workforce, right? So just think about this. Used to be, you went into your office, you sat down at the computer that IT gave you. The computer was configured by IT and security together. It was protected. And if you made a dumb mistake on that computer, 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, your endpoint security is going to catch it and stop it. But today, we're all at home. You're at home, I'm at home. We're doing all of these presentations, all of these discussions, all of our collaboration, all of our work is being done from somewhere other than that secure office. And we can't know what a person is using. People are using their Macs, people are using their Windows PCs, people are using tablets, their phones, whatever, to access that data. That is the currency of a company's lifeblood. And so endpoint security has to evolve. And one thing that we're working on very hard now is to move it away from the device to the user experience. And that's the future of security.
Absolutely. And this has been a national anthem for the Power Hour, which is, we focus on technology, but it's about people, process, and technology, and in that order. And we always seem to come back to the people piece. So let's expand on that a little bit. Typically, I like to take my audience through a little bit of a journey. We taxi, and then we go up, and then we go and we fly into a bit of cruise control. Here, we're going right into the turbulent spaces. One of the things that I like to talk about with my students or with my colleagues when I do a lot of consulting work is I look into the mindset of the cybersecurity practitioners. And I make this point that the easiest thing to do in the world is to deceive yourself. You think you've got all the technology in place, but you don't quite know what people are doing with it. How would you suggest that today the training of cybersecurity professionals needs to focus less on the technicalities and more on that people skills? Because when we read your book, we notice it came down to the types of questions that you asked. It
Absolutely.
Came down to what you were listening for. Can you expand on that a little bit, Eric?
Yeah. So when we think about cybersecurity and where you're going with this, I like it, Ali, because we're talking about training a person to be a spy hunter. So every time I speak to a group of employees about cybersecurity, every time I speak to a group of CISOs, every time I speak to a group of IT and security professionals, at the end of my keynote, at the end of my speaking, I tell them all, go out and be spy hunters. You have to change your mindset. So it's not just about installing the correct technology and hoping that it protects you. We all have to be looking for the scams. We all have to be looking for the breaches. We all have to be watching and thinking, because a long time ago, I said that the internet is not a safe place. It's the Wild West, and we're all gunfighters out there trying not to step on a rattlesnake, and the snakes are everywhere. Let me give you just one example that I found. In 2020, right, financial losses because of romance scams, and bear with me here, were $304 million. Now, first of all, during the pandemic, there have been more cyber attacks than any other time in history, because bad guys take advantage of a crisis. That's a 50% jump from 2019. That means that people like criminals, cyber criminals, are out there scamming people who are lonely because they know they're lonely, and they know that what do lonely people do? They go on dating apps, and they're exploiting them that way. They're doing everything from getting them to send money because they say they have a medical emergency, to getting them to invest in these bad investments, which are really just pyramid schemes, to stealing their unemployment benefits. So we need to think about what we're doing when we're online, because it is the perfect place for a spy to fool us. And the cyber criminals have learned from the spies.
I want to work with that just a little bit more and draw our audience's attention to the very critical use of words and language. And this is emblematic of what you see with VMware Carbon Black. You know what I mentioned early on, VMware Carbon Black focuses on the good, the bad, and the gray. There's a lot of gray area here, and I want to work with the gray area and draw from the gray day just a little bit here.
Sure.
Eric, you don't use the word hacker, and in many of your talks, you emphasize the word spy. Can you help delineate the difference between the two?
Absolutely. But you have to understand a little bit about me. My background isn't the traditional cybersecurity, CISO, certification, hands-on keyboard. My background is counterintelligence. For years, I worked undercover for the FBI as a spy hunter. I went out in the streets of DC and surrounding states and areas, and I sought spies and I tried to capture them before they did what they did. Also terrorists. Counterterrorism is just counterintelligence catching terrorists. So my science, the way that I think, is to be proactive and active in hunting the threat before it can do what they want to do. And the science of counterintelligence relies on actionable intelligence that's given to us, in the FBI's case, usually by the CIA or the NSA from overseas. So you take actionable intelligence and you use that in order to stop the threat before it can hunt you, right? We're hunting it before they hunt us. So let's take that into cybersecurity, because that's what I brought to cybersecurity. It's the same thing. Our technology gives us actionable intelligence. Something looks wrong on this user's account. This person went somewhere where they shouldn't have gone. And then that spy hunter, whether it is the technology or it is the security professional, uses that actionable intelligence to quickly go out and prevent the breach from happening or prevent the catastrophic damage that the breach can do. So technology must evolve. And that's what we're doing at VMware and Carbon Black. The big reason for the marriage of VMware and Carbon Black is to bring the robust security technology into probably one of the biggest workspace companies, VMware, in the world.
Let's work with that a little bit more. I want to go into that situation of who you are, because although you do draw a differentiation between the techies, the traditional hoodie-clad individual who's telling his grandmother not to disturb him, eating lots of bad carbs, and waiting for that moment to say, I am in. While you differentiate between the two, Eric, there's a lot of lessons that traditional model can learn from you. And I want to get into this situation where we start actually hunting, where we start actually looking for threats. I've said this very often, that war is nothing but the art of deception. Yes. You need to convince the enemy that while they see that you're far, you're actually near. When they think that you're defending, you're actually attacking. When they think that you're doing nothing, you're actually doing everything you need to be doing. What are some of the tips that you would provide to cybersecurity professionals as they begin their hunting exercises? How can they stay in such a mechanism where they let the bad actors do what the bad actors have to do so that they can gather more and more intelligence? Eric?
Well, to back up a little bit, first of all, I probably should explain why I say there are no hackers, there are only spies, yes. Right? I like to say I'm a hacker who wears a nice suit. I don't fit the prototype, but you know what? More and more the hackers are looking like me. They're working at security companies. Those old hackers that were my buddies in the 80s, what we used to try to get into security. We used to do it just for the science of it, for the interest in it, not actually to do bad things. Now, some hackers obviously back then did bad things. It was sort of a term used for everyone who used a computer to do something to breach security. Today, those hackers are all working for security companies. You make more money, get to do the same fun stuff, and far less of a chance the FBI is going to knock on your door, right? The bad guys are spies. And here's why. Espionage has evolved. And when you talk about war, Ali, that's the important thing to understand, is that any historian, a war historian, knows that wars are won by spies. Spies give the intelligence that lets the armies do their thing and win, but spies win wars. Spies are now having to evolve, and they have evolved in the last 20 some years to become the new hackers. So espionage has evolved to become cyber attacks. Used to be guys in dark alleys exchanging suitcases, leaving drops and drop sites. But today, those same spies have evolved into computer attackers who are using, cyber attackers who are using their computer systems from whatever country they're in to launch national security spying operations on the United States and Canada and all over the West. And we're getting our lunch eaten. the SolarWinds attack, for example, the recent information that they're calling the Sparrow attack on the Mac computers. We just learned that, 30,000 Mac computers have been loaded with malicious software in 153 countries. It's called Silver Sparrow. And the interesting thing about that is it just sits and waits. Now, it was found probably before whatever attacker could leverage that. The OPM attack of the past, which was the Chinese who were able to get into the Office of Personnel Management in the United States and steal all the background investigations of all the FBI agents, among so many other things. These are spies. These are spies. And the interesting thing, this thing that's a little bit scary, is the criminals have learned from the spies. Because when those attacks are used, it gets dumped on the dark web, the criminals learn from it, and they model those attacks. And that's one of the reasons that ransomware has evolved so quickly in the last few years. I mean, ransomware right now is beyond what it's ever been. It's increased 435% since 2019. And now ransomware isn't just, we're going to lock your computers and you pay us money to unlock them. It's, we're going to lock your computers and we're also going to extort you. Not only do you have to pay to unlock, if you don't pay us, we're going to publish them everywhere. So what do cyber professionals have to do? They have to not think like the original old school perimeter defense, because it doesn't work. That old perimeter defense was like an egg. This is the best analogy. One of my friends at VMware, Tom Korn, came up with this, and it's brilliant. Think of the old cybersecurity as an egg, a really hard shell. But once you penetrate that first layer of defense, you're free all the way to the yolk. You've got everything. We're building security that is a hard shell all the way through to the core. So you have to penetrate layer after layer after layer after layer, and you have to build technology to help you think like a spy hunter, to continually give you robust, actionable intelligence that allows you to hunt the threat before it hunts you. So the number one thing that security professionals can do is elevate their thinking. Don't think you're going after some kid in a hoodie in a basement. Imagine that you're going after an entire warehouse full of spies sitting in another country who just want to attack you. And that'll help you get at least an advantage over them.
Absolutely. And you know, when you delivered your keynote at CISO Forum 2020, right after your keynote, a couple of other sessions emphasized the aspect of culture. And when I referenced the Kuwait-Iraq war, one of the things that was often talked about was cultures of war, cultures of defending yourself, because culture is a design for living. And in many of your talks, Eric, you look at the designs to which we're living our lives. One of them being how heavily we rely on tools such as email. And one thing that I want to draw from that is when you think about email, I think you'll agree with me both philosophically and practically, we find ourselves focusing on the send, but not really on the receive, which gets me to ask you is that there's a lot of intelligence to be gathered. And when we read your book and we watch the movies and we learn about your narrative, you are gathering intelligence in different forms. So firstly, I want to ask you about how do you know from whatever you've gathered on scratch notes, on files, on databases, etc., how do you know and determine what kind of intelligence is actionable intelligence?
So you have to know, and like you said, you got to know what's good and what's bad and what's gray. It's a perfect way to put it. You have to know the good. So what the carbon black technology brings to the table is an understanding, an intrinsic understanding of the good. It's like, here's a great analogy. If you are a parent, if you have children, I have three, you know, when you can look at your child and know something's wrong. Like my son this morning went to go get him up for school, had a splitting headache and just looked wrong. I didn't even have to get the thermometer to know that he had a slight fever. Technology can do that. If you understand what a user's experience is across a point in time, then if that user experience changes, you can use metrics to see that it's changed and then analyze it. The more you can do that and the faster you can do that, the better chance you have of catching the breach before it proceeds laterally through your system and creates a major compromise. So technology can help you do that. The nice thing about endpoint EDR, endpoint detection and response, is that we can use a sensor to see what's happening on a device. And if that device looks like it's being used in the wrong way, we can roll it back in time because we're recording everything every 5 minutes and see where things went wrong. That also gives you an entire investigative trail for your incident responder, your investigator, to determine where the breach happened, when it happened, where it went, what they tried to do, and whether anything else was compromised. But we need to take that into the future. Absolutely. And that's where we get into intrinsic security. EDR and endpoint detection looks at a room, right? So the room that the user's in. But we need to expand that to not just look into the room, but into all the hallways that connect all the rooms within the network that connects to that data and everywhere in between. And that's what we're doing with intrinsic security. And because VMware has all those hallways and doors and rooms and provides products for all of that, by combining that with Karma Black and making it intrinsic to the software, we can find a way to do that. But security has to go beyond just the device in the hands of a user. It actually has to look at the user and give you that actionable intelligence for that user, what that user usually does, what that user has access to. Is that user, like Robert Hansen, the guy I caught, going and stealing information from places that they shouldn't have access to? That's the best early warning, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can segment your information, if you can compartmentalize the intelligence you're trying to protect, when the bad guy goes into a compartment they're not supposed to go into, well, now that's an investigation gets opened immediately. And technology and people who are trained, you marry those two together and you can catch those bad guys before they do. what they're planning to do.
I want to draw a little bit of a poll here and come back to this discussion through a bit of a different lens. Just for our audience who's watching on cyberexchange.ca, I'm getting quite a few of your questions, so thank you. Keep pouring them in. If you're sending them to direct message, that's fine. I can see them. Shout out to the CyberX team for making this super simple for me to navigate. For those who are watching on the online platform, you'll also see little tickers below with data points. There are links to a variety of VMware Carbon Black papers as well, which I highly, highly recommend you read. There are also folks from VMware Carbon Black that are online right now that you can reach out to if you want to have a follow-up conversation. I want to draw on this aspect of speed because a question has come in talking about speed of responses and how can we up speed of responses. I want to work with that just a little bit and rephrase that question for you, Eric. Speed is great, but speed without direction can be extremely fatal. When we look at your career and look at your narrative, you were an independent operative to a degree, but you did have to take some directions. You did need some guidance. Can you talk to us about the morphology and the successful makeup of a team when you are conducting an operation like yours?
Of course. So I was an undercover operative. And if we're looking at, let's just take the Robert Hansen investigation as an example. In order to keep Hansen in the FBI, keep him from retiring, and give him access to information so he would spy and we could catch him red-handed, they gave him his dream job. They put him in charge of the information assurance section in the FBI, which was the first real section in the FBI that was supposed to look at all of the computer systems and databases in the FBI and determine how to protect them. So what do we call that today? Cybersecurity. So they took the worst spy in US history, the most damaging, our first cyber spy, and they put him in charge of developing a new system of cybersecurity for the FBI. Why? It flattered him, it excited him, and it gave him access to everything so he would steal it and spy. And they threw me in the room with them because I was the one guy who understood how to catch a spy and turn on a computer in the FBI. And I was very much alone in that day-to-day interaction with him, but I had a big team behind me. Out of the field office, not headquarters, where he wouldn't run into anyone working the case. And it was a very small community who even knew that he was a spy we suspected. There were analysts and there were agents who were providing me actionable operational intelligence that would allow me to do what I needed to do. Sometimes crazy tasks, like we're developing our psychological profile, make him angry and see how he reacts. That wasn't a fun one. But also get him away from his car so we can search it. Get the keys so that, we can get into his home. Get him away from his Palm Pilot. I actually came up with that one because we think there's data on there. That ended up being the smoking gun. Right. So analysis is critical in determining whether information you get is actionable, whether you act on it. Now, this is also important for another reason, workload. An IT team can't tackle every single thing that comes at them. So we need to rely on technology to conduct that analysis for us. So that's where you have big data analytics in the cloud. That's where you have information based on global threat parameters and workload parameters that can be immediately pulled in when you see an event. So what we're building is in why we leverage the cloud and why now I'm all in on the clouds. The cloud is really the only way that you can use faster computer systems and analytics to quickly analyze an event and return whether this is actionable intelligence and where in the priority line that is, so that that workload doesn't become impossible for IT and security to respond to.
Absolutely. And there are two questions that have come in around automation and AI, which speaks strongly to the VMware Carbon Black stack as well. To those that asked it, I will come to that closer towards the end, because I have a very specific question about that I want to ask Eric, into which I'll weave that piece in. Another question that's come in, and again, I'll weave that in, but just maneuver just a little bit. Eric, strategy can be best tested by results. You measure your strategy by the results that they return. How do you know whether you're doing something wrong or whether you need to rethink what you're doing? How often, and let's call it that, in your cyber practice, when you were engaging and going after this potential spy, how often did you rethink your tools? How often did you rethink your process? What was that mindset like?
Well, going after Robert Hansen, I was rethinking my process every day. In fact, I like to say, and one theme in Gray Day is Hansen taught me how to catch himself. He was the master spy, and I was the sort of spy hunter who followed my targets from a distance. I used disguises, I used cameras. I was what's called a ghost. They never knew I was there. And suddenly I was face to face in an office with Hansen, a few feet from him for 8 hours a day, trying to get him to talk and essentially inadvertently slip up and give me information that would put us on his trail, that would give us that actionable intelligence we've been talking about during this hour, that would allow me to catch him and get out of this case and back to my life. So daily, I was reconfiguring how I addressed the information I was getting from Hansen. So he would tell a story and I was learning that, well, okay, he likes to boast. I was building my profile of him. And by using that profile, I can understand how I needed to respond to elicit more information from him, to get more information from him. So I learned that he liked to boast. I learned that he was very professorial. He really wanted someone to understand his genius. So I played up to that. I became his student. I became his mentee. He was my mentor. I allowed him to feel that he was in a role where he was teaching me. And the more he wanted to teach me, the more that I could pull, more information I could pull out of him. And then slowly I started to learn, here are the areas that I need to search. Here is where I start my hunt.
Absolutely. There's that saying, and I mean this with all due respect, is, they say that if you want to catch a thief, you've got to act like a thief, or set a thief to catch a thief, and I'm not insinuating anything here. You have to literally place yourself in that person's mentality, which I want to work on just a little bit more here. You made mention of, you were doing social engineering before social engineering was even a concept in the world of cybersecurity. Has it got you to be very, very critical about how you also talk about and share your knowledge with others? You share a lot and you go on different speeches and you talk to people, you share your experiences. And in the cybersecurity community, we all often talk about sharing intelligence with one another, but seeing what you've experienced and how you use that to capture the individual, has it reshaped the way you share information at all?
Well, I'm careful about how I share information if you're talking about on social media or what I put out there. The information I share is very focused and obviously targeted. When I'm providing a keynote, I'm talking about cybersecurity. I'm talking about catching spies, sometimes even surviving, making a Hollywood movie. On social media, I'm incredibly careful. I'm less inclined to share personal information. And when we're talking about social engineering and information sharing, I kind of want to step back to something you said earlier. I sort of put it in the back of my mind, like, we got to get back to this. Email. Yeah. You might have heard in my keynotes, you might have read in grade A, you might have seen in any number of my YouTube videos or things that I've written, that I think email is the Achilles heel of the cybersecurity industry. Email allows us to be fooled. Email allows us to be social engineered in such an extraordinary way because we rely on it to allow us to continue to be introverts. We understand that email is efficient. It's a great way to communicate because you can send it anytime. I don't have to worry about waking someone up who's across the world with a phone call. I don't have to worry about talking to a person. I can just type it out. But email can also cause problems because unless you're using tools in order to ensure, you can't be 100% sure that the person who sent you the email is the person they say they are. And of course, then we can get into other things like passwords, which should be just removed and not used and are a complete waste of time, because if all you're using is a password, you might as well not use anything at all. So I think that when we're talking about social engineering, when we're talking about how we share, and when we're talking about the ways that we share, particularly when you're using the internet, you have to be very careful. Those are the things that lead to things like romance scams or using social engineering and social media information mining in order to guess a password or to figure out the answers to people's challenge questions and passwords if that's the only second level of security they're using. So there is it's sort of getting back to how we comport ourselves, how employees need to think about how they use good internet hygiene. It all ties together.
While you're engaging in this process of gathering information, gathering data, trying to understand where this threat is evolving from, we often say that simplicity is perhaps the greatest sophistication out there. Knowing how to keep it simple, knowing how to get what you need, and acting upon it. Has this experience at all reshaped the way in which, for example, you would collect intelligence before versus how you do it now? For example, when we watch you in the movie, or we read through the book, you were taking notes, you were doing certain things where you're keeping mental notes as well. Mm-hmm. Have you find yourself rethinking that a little bit? And how has that translated into your experiences at VMware Carbon Black?
Well, specifically at VMware Karma Black, and I'm on the threat intel team called the Howlers, and to just bounce back to. I like to bounce back to little dangles you leave. Let's close all the little threads and then get to where we are. Because I see how your mind works. You leave them for me, and then I can pick them up. When you're going to be a threat researcher, when you're going to be in cybersecurity, you have to think like an attacker. You have to think like a bad guy, right? You mentioned that earlier. You have to understand how bad guys are going to attack so you can know how to defend. And taking that forward, if you just look at statistics and breaches, right? 99% of successful breaches are exploiting known malicious software, known attacks. So companies are best served using their resources to protect against those known attacks. Where I think companies can get into trouble is where they're spending a huge amount of resources working to stop the Russians from penetrating their network and getting to their data. I mean, the Russians are coming for you. You have to have a real robust security and a lot of people to stop them. But 99%, like I said, 99.9% of those attacks are attacks by cyber criminals leveraging ransomware, attacks that by nation states that are leveraging the same WannaCry attack that has been used forever for the last number of years, still the number one ransomware attack. I keep getting to ransomware because it's probably the most prolific cyber attack right now. So you want to start with what you know works. Building security around protecting your data from those attacks that we know about. And part of that isn't just let's build a defense. It's let's make sure we continually are manning the walls and we're marching outside them to patrol around our defense. We're hunting threats. We're patching to make sure that we're patching those most immediate critical issues. So you have to know what are the most immediate critical issues. And we're training our people to know that the attacks of today, that crap that was happening 10 years ago, but the attacks of today and attacks of tomorrow, and how the cyber attackers are going to try to fool the people who will make the mistakes. Computers don't make mistakes unless they're configured wrong. The people are going to make mistakes, and the spies know it, and that's why they go after people, and that's why they use email, because it's the number one way that they know that they're going to get through everything and get to that one person.
Absolutely. And not just make mistakes, make the same mistakes. It's quite unbelievable how often we find ourselves when talking about what a particular incident once was, we often say same soup reheated. Same thing happened all over again. And people were just not prepared for it. It was just masked a little differently. Right. Let's go down this road a little bit more. And I'm glad that you've picked up on the little nuggets that I'm leaving here and there, because some of the questions that are coming up as well, I think are feeding off that too. Let's go to the hot button topic that has come up in 2 questions to me now. So thank you for bringing this in. And that is the aspect of insider threats.
Right.
You've spoken very prolifically about identity access management, the shifting parameter. And in a session that I did in one of my first power hours with Bill Harmer, I made a line which I borrowed from existentialist philosophy, where I said, there's I think, therefore I am. And there's also I connect, therefore I am. And you need to interrogate that. Just because you've connected doesn't mean you truly are who you are. Your experiences, how have they reshaped your perspective on insider threats?
Yes. So my claim to fame really is catching the most damaging trusted insider in the history of trusted insiders. I know sometimes people say, hey, Snowden was bad, but Hansen truly eclipsed him.
Yep.
But we have to think of trusted insiders sort of in 2 flavors. You have the employee who's already within your circle of trust, the person who you've granted access, who you're paying a salary, who you assume is a good person. And they, for whatever reason, maybe they're recruited by a espionage agency, maybe they're a disgruntled employee, maybe they just really need money, maybe they're being blackmailed. For whatever reason, they choose to spy and they steal information. Now that exfiltration, there's your spy word, of information, you have to identify it's happening. Now, the only way to do that is to have technology that, once again, knows what's good and knows what's bad and follows the user experience. If you're following that person, let's call him John's user experience, then you know when John is accessing things that he shouldn't, or when he's doing things in the network, probing places, looking for things that he shouldn't. Because now when you steal information, you're not pulling files out of a file cabinet and using a microfilm camera to take snapshots really quickly. Today, well, we would probably just use our phones, right?
Right.
You have to actually access some database within the core company. If you're segmenting information, compartmentalizing it, you can identify when that bad guy's doing it. So that's one flavor, right? You follow the user experience, you can stop the trusted insider. Here's the other flavor though, the virtual trusted insider. I send you, Ali, an email and you get the email and it's so targeted. I've researched you for months on social media. I know you're the guy because you have access. Maybe you're a systems admin. You have access. I want you. And so I send you a targeted email that completely fools you. And you click on the link and you do this, or I'm using some secondary separate website where I'm going to get you to give me your username and log on, and I'm going to mine your two-factor authentication. I'm going to do it all in real time. So now I can become you within the network environment. I can become you within the data set. I'm using your authentication. I've turned you into what I coined this phrase a while ago, a virtual trusted insider. You're mine now, and I'm becoming you. And I use you to create new access, to leave data points behind. Maybe I even sacrifice you to IT. They think they've caught the breach, but I've created some dummy account, some hidden account somewhere so I can come back in, or left command and control, or done something that allows me to come in. The Chinese were great with this in OPM. They used a false flag account that they infiltrated, that they burned, and OPM thought they found the breach, but they hadn't. The real breach continued to go for a year after that. So the trust insiders is difficult, and it terrifies everyone in cybersecurity because it's the most nefarious way to steal data, either the person inside or the person that is an unknowing trusted insider because their account access has been breached.
And I think it says something about the mental state of cybersecurity professionals as well, because quite literally, if you are at the helm or you're leading a particular organization and you are watchful of all of these different types of threats, really anybody could potentially, while not an obvious threat, nobody's outside of surveillance. And it does impact you as a professional. This question, I feel, it's going to be a question it's actually a panel topic coming up at Canadian Women in Cybersecurity. And it's a question that I feel we definitely need to address. And I thank the audience member for bringing this up. And that is on the mental state and the mental health of cybersecurity professionals. Going through what you're going, you are never out of duty. You're always on duty. How do you manage that? And how do you reconcile that with your own personal being?
Let's take that one step further, right? So cybersecurity professionals, IT professionals, security professionals have a terrible job in this last year. The pandemic has driven everyone to their homes. Now let's just imagine this. Let's play a game of exponentials, right? You have people, employees, X number of employees who are using X number of devices to access the data at the company, or the data that the IT professional is trying to protect. Each one of those devices has X or Y, you can move the integer up, number of apps on it. And each one of those apps has another number of access to different databases in the cloud. Yeah. There's no way. Talk about being exhausted. Once again, going back to that, our original, where we started, it's not an employee coming into the office and sitting down at the desktop or laptop that's been configured by IT, and that's all they use to access data. Today, a person at home might have 2 or 3 different computers. They might have a Windows and a Mac. And depending on where they're sitting in the house, they're using a different one. Yeah. In the old school approach, right, you would need 2 separate IT teams, a team that understands the Mac OS and a team that understands Windows. And that's 2 separate workloads. And now you have to worry about what apps are running on there. And it becomes completely unmanageable. So yes, IT, there's no one more stressed in the business environment right now, probably, than the IT people that are trying to hold the line against cyber attacks when there are so many points of failure that are being built into this distributed workforce by nature of the pandemic sending everyone home. I mean, take it one more step further. There's no way to even account for what router a person is using in their home, right? Absolutely. So once again, getting back to intrinsic security, If we build security, the future of security, this is the future of security. Everybody knows it. We're just working to build it real fast at VMware. Intrinsic security means we're looking at the user experience. So what we like to say is any app, any cloud, any device, we're following the user. Who cares what they log on to?
Yep.
Because they get one workspace and it's the same no matter what they're logging into. And it's the same security no matter what they're logging into. So that means that if you're using it and you're following that user, then the IT only has to worry about that user on one workspace. And it doesn't matter if they're using a Mac, and it doesn't matter if they're using Windows to log in, or their phone or their Android. It's all the same. It's completely the same. So that means less stress on IT and far less workload to deal with.
Absolutely. And, for the audience that's listening in, at CISO Forum, for example, we had numerous sessions with VMware Carbon Black, where not only do they reference those case studies, but they also talk about specific use cases of deploying VMware Carbon Black solutions within small enterprise, but also large enterprise, and the differences between deployments in public sector, private sector, access for employees and access for the public. I highly recommend to our audience that you not only download those white papers, but also access some of those videos as you're looking at VM Carbonware as a potential solution. We've got about 18 more minutes. Actually, I'll rephrase that. We have about 16 more minutes. And I have 8 questions that have come in. I'm going to find a way to weave them in while also doing what I need to do as a host. I want to go back to a little thread that I left before when I talked about the idea of you set a thief to catch a thief. Spies ultimately take on spies. And in my readings about spy culture and in my readings on how you gather intelligence, reward is a very, very crucial tool within that. Reward and also recognition. How did that factor into how you were gathering data and ensuring that the person you needed that data from was consistently giving in to what you were asking for? How did you structure reward?
Yeah, so understanding spies is important. And here's a back-end way of getting back to cybersecurity, because espionage is now cyber attacks, right? And especially if you're trying to stop spies don't get paid unless they win. Criminals don't get paid unless they win, right? An IT person, a FBI agent, a CIA officer gets paid a salary to go out there and hunt, to go out there and fight the spies. But the spies, if they're going to win, if they're going to get paid, they got to win. So they are working very hard to win, which means that you can't be complacent. So if you want to be a effective spy hunter, you have to change your mindset. You have to work just as hard or harder than they are, really harder. In the FBI, we used to say we have what's called, and excuse my language, but my supervisor once said, "Here's the kick-ass line, right? Here's where you got to be to get your step increases and your performance just right. But here's where we operate, way above that, which means you're not just showing up and doing your job. You're putting in all the time to research. You're putting in the time to understand tradecraft for foreign intelligence services. You're on your off hours. You're driving around the city streets just to find that great cut through that's going to get you in front of your target. You're climbing up on rooftops because you're going to figure out that perfect vantage point to take a shot in that park where there might be an exchange. When you're walking around with your family, you spend the time to go walk around in parks just because you're looking for the white rock, and you might just turn it over and see if there's secrets under it. You might find a single or a drop site. In the cyber world, it's the same thing. You have to elevate your thinking. You can't just sit and monitor a screen and think, yeah, well, I'll see what's wrong. You have to actively go out there and hunt. Look around in systems, train personnel, understand what looks wrong in your databases. Did someone access a compartment they shouldn't? But compartment's sort of a spy term, but did someone access a database or an area in the network that they shouldn't? These are the ways that you catch a spy, and you have to change your mindset completely. You have to work harder than you've ever worked before.
Absolutely. And one thing that we often say here in Canada is you got to read for what's not written. And that is one of the most powerful ways while you're training folks from a forensics perspective as well. I'll try and weave in the rest of the questions. And, I really like this concept, Eric, that you've emphasized, that you've got to come up with ideas. And if an idea is not dangerous, it's not really an idea. You've got to be willing and you've got to be supported to travel with those ideas and try them out within certain environments, which comes to this aspect of how do you foster the right critical thinking within your cybersecurity teams. Now, VMware Carbon Black, one thing that you mentioned, which I loved, was the focus of these sessions are security, nothing else not sales, not anything else, security. So let's also dive into, from that perspective, within VMware Carbon Black, how do you make sure that you're empowering your teams to go beyond that 9 to 5 mindset, if at all anything, and start thinking outside of the box, and as I'm known to say, burn the box entirely?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just spoke to a high school. I like to speak to as many schools and colleges as I can, because as you said, I love getting the word out about this. It's really not about sales. This is about security. It's about the future of cybersecurity and how we reduce the threat, particularly from nation states. That's where my thinking is, and make the world safe from cyber attacks. Try to make the internet at least a little bit more safe, right? And I was asked, what should I study if I want to get into cybersecurity? And the obvious answers are mathematics and getting advanced in math and some technology classes and computers. But I said, you know what, the real critical thing, because you can learn all that, is critical thinking. The idea of thinking outside of the box, thinking what we call in the spy world asymmetrically, not in a linear line, but all the way around the line. Get fuzzy around the line. Here's what I think, but here are all the other things that I might think about as I'm thinking along that direction. Kind of like when you're playing chess, you're not just thinking one move, you're thinking the next 10 moves ahead if you ever want to win, right? You're thinking of all the different options. If I move this piece here, then he could do all of this, or she can move all of these different. So the idea is that critical thinking is that asymmetric thinking, in that this is what I think I need to do to solve the problem, but here are all the other ways things can go wrong. Because one of the problems we have in security, and we've always had, is that the bad guys stay one step ahead. Because security by necessary is necessarily reactive. We react to threats. Somebody commits a crime, the police get called, the police react. Maybe a bunch of wonky people in government think about it and try to figure out how to stop it in the future. Some catastrophic event happens, and then we spend millions of dollars figuring out how to prevent it in the future. The bad guys are doing something different. Here's my best analogy, because my background is in counterterrorism as well. Terrorists come up with this crazy idea that we're going to hijack planes and fly them into buildings. Didn't see that coming, right? So the United States spends all the money we have to completely reformat our government into creating the Department of Homeland Security. We change the way everyone flies. You take your shoes off, you put all your bags through scanners. Nobody can go to the gate with anyone anymore. Flying becomes miserable, and we prevent that from ever happening in the future. But what do the bad guys do? They don't try to hijack planes again. They slam trucks into buildings and blow them up. They just go for the next different thing. And I could go on and on. So as security people, we need to be thinking like the attacker and always thinking the next step.
Absolutely. And I want to work with this just a little bit. We've got 10 minutes and I do apologize to the crowd. There's 6 more questions. I'm going to take 2 of them and then we're going to have to come to a line. But I do promise you there are more power hours. And if Eric likes me, we will return with another session. Eric,
I'm having fun.
That's good to hear. Eric, this is a tricky one. I'm not going to read it verbatim. And I think it's in line with what we wanted to talk about. So I'm going to reword it just a little bit. And I'm going to excuse my language here, but when it comes to hacking cultures, especially nation state attacks, the perpetrators of these attacks, the perpetrators of these crimes also want to stick the metaphorical middle finger to the country that they're attacking, And there's also this aspect, when we talked about reward, there's this aspect of recruiting. So the question here is talking about, have you noticed how bad actors, especially if they're coming, for example, the example that's been quoted here is ISIS. They will produce a lot of propaganda videos. They will try and recruit actively. Why are you suddenly seeing this surge in propaganda videos to recruit people? Is this peculiar to one group, or is this happening also on the dark web, where evil actors are trying to recruit others into their space, surely for the thrill, or also to make a point on an ideological standpoint?
Yes, that's an excellent question and a good job paraphrasing. There are 2 things to that. Yes, recruitment is one of the great tools of a spy. Spies prey on the weak, they prey on the susceptible, they prey on people that they can fool and defraud. Spies are excellent masters of deception. And terrorist groups have learned from spies. In fact, some terrorist groups have been trained by spies. Al Qaeda, for example, there's a lot of data that suggests that they were trained by spies from other countries. So yes, they will use recruitment tools that prey on people that, for example, ISIS is great at using social media to recruit people who are lost, who are looking for a community, who are bullied, who are near suicidal, who just need someone to help them, save them, care for them. And they will use those tools in order to fool that person into doing something terrible and catastrophically bad, right? By making them think it's good. I mean, a lot of the most evil people think that they're doing something for the right reason. When we move this into cybersecurity, we move from counterterrorism to counterintelligence, and we look at the dark web, this is happening as well. There's a reason that the dark web has become the third largest economy on Earth. Can you believe that? That's bigger than whole country. That's bigger than the top two economies, the top two countries on Earth with the biggest economies. The third largest economy on Earth. It is because it has become a full business with scale and all of the verticals of a business. You have people who do nothing on the dark web except for develop malware and put it there for sale. You have people who do nothing but distribute the malware to people who buy it and then launch attacks and receive money back for those attacks and then pay all the way up the chain. I mean, that's extraordinary. And a lot of the people who are making the money off of this are sitting in countries where there's no extradition to the US or the UK, where Interpol is doing a lot of work to try to catch them. The FBI is doing a lot of work to catch them. And you find them and they're sitting in, Russia, and Russia shrugs their shoulders and says, you can't touch any of our people. So looking at the dark web and how they're able to recruit, but also employ people who want to get into cyber attacks. You can make a lot of money. If you want to be a distributor of ransomware, your starting salary is about $100,000.
Yep.
Because you're a criminal, that's tax-free.
Absolutely. And I think this aspect of recruitment videos also points to the fact that when you watch those who watch C4, or when you're coming to Canadian Women in Cyber, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is this aspect of how do you attract diverse talent into cybersecurity and how do you retain that talent? Very often you hear this thing in cybersecurity where we hire for skill and we fire for fit. And it's really important to unpack what do we mean by fit and have the right recruitment strategies in place. Otherwise, as Eric described, the lucrativeness of other areas can become very, very promising. I'm going to go to the last question and then we'll come to the end of this session. And this question, I knew it was going to come up, and it's on automation. Now, those of you who are familiar with the VMware Carbon Black Stack, there is a lot of automation embedded within it. But as I've said before, there is no AI without IA, no artificial intelligence without information architecture. Eric, your perspective on the heightened amount of automation, because the false positives, the accuracy rates are still not where they need to be. What's your perspective on the heightened amount of automation that we're seeing, especially in threat intelligence?
So here's what you need with automation. You need to understand context. Context is really important to us. That's a word that I love. Context says so much. It's one of those beautiful words. As an author, I love words like that tell an entire story in one word. Context gives you actionable intelligence. Context gives you an understanding of where a breach landed and where they went. Kind of, we call it breadcrumbs sometimes, and how it moved lateral. Context gives you the idea of the number of workloads you need to deal with an event that's happening. But context is also a pretty awesome word for understanding your digital workspace and understanding what matters and what you need to jump on and deal with right away. Big data and analytics, AI, they're all words for the same thing. It's taking information and crunching it and coming back with either this is something you need to jump on immediately, an alert, or a solution.
Absolutely.
The more we understand context across all attacks, the faster and better that becomes. And so that's why we got to go to the cloud. Everything has to be linked up to the cloud. That has to be a secure cloud environment where context can happen in a global sense. Absolutely. And threat research can be instant. So if something is hitting you over in Durham, then immediately everybody in Washington, D.C., where I am, is protected from it because that context is immediately shared everywhere. So you need big global companies that have the context And that's why it works with VMware, because those are cloud solutions and Workspace ONE and digital workspace that everyone is using, right? You add Microsoft and you add all the other big companies to that. Now you have a lot of context, and the computers can do what they need to do in order to understand what looks good, what looks bad, and what looks gray.
And one of the best partners of context is interdisciplinarity. Now, to our audience, I invite you to take a look at Eric's profile. It's not like, as he mentioned before, that he went and received a certification in ethical hacking or a certification in computer systems networking. From his early studies to then going into what he's famous for, and then going back into law, and now coming into VMware Carbon Black, you'll notice one thing about VMware Carbon Black is the interdisciplinarity of their teams. And I repeatedly say this when I'm doing practices in this space, 90% of my time is actually not with IT, just saying. That's where context really realizes itself. Eric, we've come very close. We've got 2 more minutes. I usually, to everybody that asks other questions, I promise you we will have other sessions, and I will work this out with VMware Carbon Black. Thank you for the support. Eric, normally to people, when we're closing, I ask them a question on their favorite book or their favorite movie. But this time around, thanks to our audience, I'm going to scratch that and ask you a question verbatim. And that is, looking back at how you caught who you caught, what are some things that you would do differently? You can only go north, not south and north at the same time. What would you rethink about the decisions you made?
Right. So in the Robert Hansen investigation, the one thing I think I would have done differently is I would have worked hard to keep a lot of the stress and the pain and the fear that I was suffering within the investigation from coming back home with me. I know that this answer steps outside of our rubric in cybersecurity, but when I look back at that case, I didn't fail in the case. I succeeded. I won. But where I did fail, and it could have been catastrophic, is by bringing home to my wife, who was at home, a lot of the stress. Couldn't tell her what was going on. And so that stress became even more difficult. Now, this happens to people who work undercover. It's why undercover work has one of the highest rates of divorce in the FBI. But she stuck with me, and I survived it. I think that I could have done a little bit better. I also would never have gone to law school at night. I would have found a way to go to day school and enjoyed my law school experience.
I completely, and you know what, Eric, I do appreciate the fact that not only have you given us a peek into your professional life, but you've been personal about it. And that makes you very relatable. So on behalf of the advisory board at CyberX, on behalf of myself, all the organizers of the Power Hour, a shout out to you, a shout out to VMware Carbon Black for making this session possible. Eric, I'm going to ask you to stay on just for another 2 minutes so we can have a debrief in the green room. But with your permission, I will bring today's session to a conclusion by wrapping up everything that we've heard in one statement. You know, I mentioned the Iraq-Kuwait war earlier on, and I remember watching that war very closely because of the impact it had on my community. And one of the things that a teacher of mine said during that, and she passed away a couple of months later, but when I was spending some time with her, she mentioned to me where she said, Ali, wars may start when you like, but never end when you please. The world that we face ourselves in from a cybersecurity perspective, yes, it is a community, as Eric has just expressed to you, which is laden with spies, laden with threats. It's not an easy space. And this is where you need to partner up with the right organizations. That's where organizations like VMware Carbon Black come to the table. They're not vendors per se, partners. And once you know who your partners are and who your allies are, the experience becomes a lot more different. My name is Ali Hirji. This is the last Power Hour for the month of February. As next week, we're going into Career Expo, and then we're going into Canadian Women in Cybersecurity, and then Beyond Borders. I look forward to hosting you in sessions during the conferences. And if you have any ideas for future Power Hours, feel free to drop them on the Cyber Exchange platform. Once again, on behalf of Team CyberX, on behalf of myself and the whole community at Durham College and the whole Cyber Exchange community, I thank you all for tuning in. And Eric, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to have you stay on, and I'll see you in the green room. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.